I think we should see this less in terms of being concerned about trade and more an issue of border security. I think it would be foolish to dismiss this as just a ruse. It would be naive to assume that he's just bluffing.
Mexico's president has warned of possible retaliation after Donald Trump threatened to impose sweeping tariffs on imports unless the country halts the flow of illegal migrants and drugs into the US. The American president-elect, Trump, vowed to impose steep tariffs, 25% on imports from Mexico and Canada, with an additional 10% tariff on China. And he said he'd do so on his first day in office. Well, Trump has not spoken specifically about British goods, but Sebastian Gorka, Trump's chosen as his new counter-terrorism advisor, told Times Radio British people have nothing to worry about.
If you love your nation, then you will find common ground with President Trump. If you believe in Brexit and national sovereignty and the special relationship between 10 Downing Street and the White House, you'll be very happy at 12:01 on January the 20th, when my former boss will be reinstalled, God willing, as my future boss, and will take the oath of office standing on the steps in front of Congress. So if you were alive for the 4 years we were in the White House, then you'll know it was a golden era, and it will be even more splendiferous for the next 4 years.
Well, that was Sebastian Gorka speaking to Times Radio earlier. Douglas Carswell is president and chief executive of the Missisispi Centre for Public Policy. He's a former UKIP MP. He was also director of the Department for International Trade under Liz Truss. Joins us now from the United States. Good evening, Douglas.
Good evening, Carol. How are you?
I'm very well. Good to have you with us. What do you make of this announcement from the president-elect of these 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, two of America's closest trading allies?
I mean, tariffs are never good news economically. And even if you're a Trump apologist, I don't think you can pretend that there's anything ever good economically about tariffs. But I mean, the conventional wisdom seems to be that Trump is primarily talking about tariffs in order to address economic issues, and the feeling that America has somehow been too generous by allowing China and others to trade with it. I'm just not sure that that's necessarily correct. I'm not sure that what Trump has recently announced is primarily about economics. I think it's primarily concern about the border and concern specifically about mass uncontrolled immigration coming in from Mexico and Canada. And I would read the announcement of a 25% tariff on goods from Canada and Mexico as primarily a concern that Trump and the Trump team has about mass, large-scale immigration that is potentially going to change the demographics of the United States. And I think we shouldn't underestimate his determination to do something about that. So I think we should see this less in terms of being concerned about trade and more an issue of border security. I think it would be foolish to dismiss this as just a ruse. It would be naive to assume that he's just bluffing. No one really knows what his intentions are. But I wouldn't underestimate the seriousness of Trump and the people around him to stop uncontrolled mass immigration. They certainly don't want to repeat what they see as the mistakes of Western Europe over the past few years.
And the president-elect also said that China has failed to implement the death penalty for fentanyl traffickers. Fentanyl, of course, a huge problem across the United States. And he's talking about even bigger tariffs on Chinese imports. If he does go ahead and do this, and he says he's going to do it on day one in his latest post on his Truth Social platform, which is how he seems to announce many of his policies, what is that going to mean for the US economy?
I mean, it'd be very bad news. You just need to look at where a lot of US imports come in. For example, take petroleum, oil imports from Canada. If you put a 25% tariff on imports from Canada, you would put gas prices, petrol prices up very, very significantly overnight for the US consumer. You would have huge implications. I mean, America imports a huge amount of stuff from Canada and from Mexico. To put a 25% tariff on would have very disruptive consequences and inflationary consequences right away for the US consumer. But I don't think you should underestimate that. The conventional conservative view in America has always been that free trade is good and that tariffs are bad. And this has been the orthodoxy under sort of Reagan and Bush the elder and Bush the younger. What's changed with Team Trump is that the sort of the J.D. Vance view, which is that somehow tariffs are a good thing because somehow you can make your economic competitors pay the price of the tariff. I mean, this is certainly a sort of unconventional view. It's not one I agree with, but you shouldn't underestimate the extent to which the people around Trump believe this. I think J.D. Vance would argue that if you were to put a tariff on Chinese goods, that would have an influence, an effect on the exchange rates to the effect that China would be paying the price. It's not a view I agree with, but this isn't really about what I think. I think the Trump team goes along with this idea of tariffs. So I think it would be very naive to think he's just bluffing just because he announces this on social media. He's had 4 years to think through what he's going to do if he's back in the White House. And I think he means it. I think unless the mass influx of illegal migrants across the land borders of Mexico and Canada is stopped, I really do think he will put a 25% tariff on.
And we've already heard from Mexico and Canada threatening that they will retaliate with slapping their own tariffs on goods which they import from the United States. Yeah. Where do you think Britain's going to be in all of this? We're already hearing warnings from some EU leaders that they should be ready for tariffs on EU goods going into the United States. Where does this leave Britain? Do you think we should be braced for tariffs on the goods that we send to the US?
If the UK government played its cards right, there is a very, very good opportunity for the UK to have, in effect, a complete tariff-free agreement with the US. Trump has this sort of almost sentimental, weak, soft spot for the UK. He's made it clear that he would be willing to cut some kind of deal so that the UK would be exempt from any tariffs that would affect the rest of Europe, the EU in particular. But it would require a willingness on the part of the current administration, that Starmer, to be willing to come to the table. I think if Starmer wanted a free trade agreement with the United States, I think that is on offer. That is doable. That was never doable under Biden, but I think this could be done with Trump.
We didn't manage to get one last time he was in power, despite the fact that he was particularly pally with Boris Johnson. Why do you think it could be an option, or it could well be possible for Keir Starmer to get a free trade deal with Trump? To be fair,
the offer was there on the table. The issue wasn't Boris Johnson or Donald Trump. The issue was Theresa May. Theresa May, if you remember, was Prime Minister. She had the opportunity to have a free trade agreement with Trump, and she didn't take it. She was, as I'm sure you recall, intent on trying to achieve Brexit in name only and tie Britain as closely as possible to the European Union.
Well, that's another whole argument. We won't go back down that one, if I may. But just tell us why you think we could get a free trade agreement this time.
But it's important, Carol, to remember that it's the failure of successive British administrations, particularly Theresa May, to take an opportunity that's there on the table. That opportunity, I think, will be there then. One can't be 100% sure with Donald Trump, but I think the signs are that that offer of a free trade agreement, a comprehensive agreement, tariff-free agreement, will be there. If I was a government official in Britain now, I would be game planning what that might mean for things like rules of origin, because obviously if Europe had tariffs imposed on it, if China and the rest of the world had tariffs imposed on them, but Britain didn't, that would be a huge opportunity for Britain. But one would, I think, need to sort of start to game plan what that would mean for rules of origin and our relations with third parties, particularly given some of the trade agreements that we've made over the past 3 or 4 years. So, I mean, I think there is an opportunity there, but it would certainly require a little bit of humility on the part of Keir Starmer and perhaps his foreign secretary. It might be wise not to be insulting to the Trump administration. And it might, as Peter Mandelson, I think, rather wisely said the other day, it might be an idea to try and sort of leverage whatever connections Trump can with Elon Musk and Team Trump.
Through Nigel Farage.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm delighted that Nigel is in the House of Commons, but I think someone like Peter Mandelson might be the perfect person to try to make this happen. Certainly, talk to Farage, take his advice. But I think the opportunity for a Labour government that is Atlanticist to do a deal with Donald Trump, who, party politics aside, is a bit of a Britophile. I think the opportunity to find common ground is there. I mean,
and we'll have to leave it there. We are out of time, I'm afraid, but it's really good to speak to you. Douglas Carswell, President and Chief Executive of the Missisippi Centre for Public Policy. He's also, of course, a former UKIP MP. He's also a former Director of the Department for International Trade. Good to speak to you. Thanks so much, Douglas.
Thank you, Carol.